So, picture the scene. It's 1968. Ford, the American giant, had just spent the last few years kicking Ferrari all over the French countryside. They'd built the GT40, a monstrous thing with a massive V8, and with it, they'd conquered Le Mans. They'd won in '66. They'd won in '67. They had proven their point with a very large, very loud hammer. You'd think they would have packed up, gone home, and spent the next decade bragging about it. But no. Winning, you see, is a bit of a drug. And Ford was well and truly hooked. They didn't just want to win again, they wanted to build something even more spectacular. They wanted the perfect racing car. The problem was, the men in blazers who run motorsport decided to change the rules. They're always doing that. Just when things get properly exciting, someone in a stuffy office gets nervous. For 1968, they announced that the Big Banger prototype engines, the 7-liter monsters that made the ground shake, were banned. Suddenly, everyone was limited to a paltry 3 liters. It was like telling a heavyweight boxer he could now only fight with his little finger. Ford's mighty V8s were suddenly useless. All that work, all that glorious noise, was now confined to the history books. An entire racing philosophy was thrown out of the window overnight. This sent every team scrambling. How do you win the world's toughest endurance races with an engine half the size of what you're used to? It was a monumental headache. For Ford, this wasn't just a problem, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to show that they weren't just a one-trick pony with a massive engine. They could be clever. They could be sophisticated. They enlisted the help of Allen MAN Racing, a brilliant British outfit that knew a thing or two about making Fords go very, very fast. The mission was clear. Build a new car for this new 3-liter world. A car that would be just as dominant as the GT40, but in a completely different way. The stage was set for a new kind of racing war. It wouldn't be about brute force anymore. It would be about clever engineering, lightweight construction, and slippery aerodynamics. The old guard was out, and a new, nimbler generation of cars was on its way in. Ford of Britain, working with Allen MAN, decided they would lead this charge. They weren't just going to build a car to meet the new rules. They were going to build a car that would define them. They were going to build a machine so advanced, so beautiful, and so fast that everyone else would simply have to give up and go home. This was the dawn of the project that would become the Ford F3L. Now, when you need a 3-liter engine in 1968, there was really only one place to go: Cosworth. They had just cooked up the single greatest engine in the history of Formula One, the double 4-valve, or DFV. This thing was a masterpiece. It was light, it was powerful, and it was winning everything in sight. So, Allen MAN had a brilliant, if slightly unhinged, idea. Why not take this screaming, high-strung Grand Prix engine and shove it into an endurance car? A car that needed to run flat out for 24 hours straight. It was a bit like asking a sprinter to run a marathon. Ambitious doesn't quite cover it. The man who designed the DFV, the engineering genius Keith Duckworth, was not impressed. In fact, he was horrified. He apparently told the Ford team in no uncertain terms that this was a monumentally stupid idea. The DFV, he explained, was a delicate, precise instrument. It was designed to run for a couple of hours in a lightweight Formula One car, not to be battered and vibrated to death for a full day in a heavy sports prototype. The vibrations alone, he warned, would shake the car, and the engine, to pieces. It was a ticking time bomb. Using it for Le Mans was, in his professional opinion, lunacy. But did they listen? Of course not. When has a truly great idea ever been stopped by a bit of common sense? The allure of the DFI was just too strong. It produced a staggering 420 horsepower from just 3 liters. That was more power than anyone else had. If they could just make it survive, they would be untouchable. The plan was to use the engine as a stressed member of the chassis, meaning it would be a part of the car's structure. This would save weight and make the car incredibly rigid. It was a technique straight from the Formula One playbook, and it was utterly revolutionary for a sports car. So, the decision was made. Against the advice of the very man who created the engine, the project went full steam ahead. They were going to tame the untamable. They believed their engineers could solve the vibration issues and build a car tough enough to house this thoroughbred engine. It was a gamble of epic proportions. They were betting the entire project on the hope that they knew better than the engine's own father. This single, defiant choice would come to define the F3L. It was the source of its incredible promise and ultimately the seed of its tragic downfall. With a Formula One engine chosen, they needed a body to match its high-tech credentials. This job fell to a designer named Len Bailey, and what he came up with was, well, it was pornography in painted aluminum. The car he drew, which became the Ford F3L, didn't look like it was from 1968. It looked like it had arrived in a time machine from the year 2000. It was impossibly low, impossibly wide, and impossibly sleek. It had curves in places where other cars had boring straight lines. It was a rolling sculpture, a testament to what happens when aerodynamics and art have a baby. Every single line on the F3L, or P68 as it was also known, screamed speed. The cockpit was a tiny bubble of glass set in the middle of a vast flowing body. The front wings swooped down to almost scrape the ground, while the rear haunches rose up over the massive back tires before tapering off into a sharp, cut-off tail. There were no clumsy wings or spoilers bolted on as an afterthought. Everything was integrated, smooth, and purposeful. It was designed in a wind tunnel to be as slippery as a bar of soap in a bathtub. It was so beautiful you just wanted to stand and stare at it. Even standing still, the F3L looked like it was doing 200 miles an hour. It was incredibly light, weighing less than a modern city car, but it had the power of a supercar. The power-to-weight ratio was, for the time, mind-bending. The whole car was shrink-wrapped around the driver, the engine, and the fuel tanks. There wasn't an ounce of fat on it. It was the automotive equivalent of a Greyhound, pure muscle and sinew, built for one thing and one thing only, to go astonishingly fast. Other cars on the grid looked like tractors next to it. It was a spaceship in a field of biplanes. This was a car designed to win races before the flag even dropped, simply by intimidating the opposition with its sheer beauty and futuristic presence. When it was unveiled, jaws hit the floor. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. Ford and Alan Mann hadn't just built a new racing car, they had created a vision of the future. It was a statement of intent, written in flowing lines of fiberglass and aluminum. This car wasn't just going to be fast, it was going to be a legend, or so they thought. The problem with things that look this good is that they are often hiding a dark secret. The dark secret of the F3L revealed itself the moment a driver got brave with the throttle pedal. On a long, fast straight, as the speedo climbed past 150 miles an hour, the car would get flighty, and by flighty, I mean it would try to take off. The beautiful, slippery shape that was so good at cutting through the air at low speeds had a terrifying flaw. At very high speeds, the smooth body started to act like a wing. It would generate lift. The front end would go light, the steering would become useless, and the driver would be left gripping the wheel, praying they didn't become an unwilling pilot. This was a catastrophic problem. You can't win an endurance race if your car wants to fly every time it gets to top speed. The engineers were in a panic. Their perfect, beautiful design was fundamentally unstable, so they started desperately trying to fix it. The first solution was to cut ugly holes and vents into the smooth bodywork to try and release the trapped air pressure. Then they bolted on a crude front spoiler, a sort of chin scoop that ruined the purity of the nose. It was like drawing a mustache on the Mona Lisa. It helped a little, but it wasn't enough. The next more drastic step was to add a rear wing, and not just any wing. They fitted a massive, hydraulically operated wing that was connected to the suspension. The idea was that as the car accelerated and the rear squatted down, the wing would flatten out for less drag on the straights. Then, under braking, as the car's weight shifted forward, the wing would pop up to a steep angle, acting as an air brake and pushing the rear tires into the ground. It was an incredibly complex and clever system. It was also something else to go wrong. These changes, born of desperation, slowly chipped away at the F3L's stunning beauty. The pure, simple shape that Len Bailey had created was now cluttered with tacked-on aerodynamic aids. The car that was meant to be a vision of the future now looked like it had been in a fight in a scrapyard. It was a compromise, a beautiful idea that had been beaten into submission by the harsh laws of physics. They had managed to make the car more stable, but in doing so, they had broken its heart. The sleek spaceship was gone, replaced by a machine covered in scars. The F3L's first race was the 1968 BOAC 500 at Brands Hatch. Even with its new, slightly awkward aero bits, the car was a sensation. In practice, it was stupendously fast. Bruce McLaren, a man who knew a thing or two about speed, put it on pole position. His teammate Denny Hume was right there with him. The two F3Ls were miles quicker than anything else. They were faster than the new Porsches, faster than the Alfa Romeos. It seemed that despite all the problems, the raw potential of that Cosworth engine in that lightweight body was simply unbeatable. Everyone thought they were about to witness the start of a new dynasty. When the race started, the F3Ls simply vanished. They shot off into the lead, their screaming DFV engines making a noise that sent shivers down your spine. It was a sound unlike anything else on the grid, a high-pitched Formula One shriek among the gruff rumbles of the other sports cars. For a few glorious laps, the F3L was delivering on every single one of its promises. It was leading, it was dominant, and it looked spectacular doing it. The gamble seemed to be paying off. The warnings from Keith Duckworth, the stability problems, the last-minute changes, it all seemed irrelevant as the cars lapped the field. But then, reality came calling. As Duckworth had predicted, the DFV was not happy. The vibrations were immense. On Hume's car, a drive shaft joint failed, likely shaken to bits. He was out. A short while later, the lead car, driven by McLaren, coasted into the pits with a plume of smoke. The engine had failed. Just like that, the dream was over. The two fastest cars in the race were out before they'd even gotten properly started. The crowd, which had been mesmerized by their speed, was left in stunned silence. The F3L had shone brighter than any other star, but it had burned out in an instant. This became the story of the F3L's life. It would show up at a race, qualify at the front, lead for a bit, and then break. At the Nürburgring, it was fastest again, but then crashed. At Spa, a suspension failure. At Le Mans, the one race it was truly built for, it failed within hours. The complex, hydraulically powered wing, which was banned shortly after its introduction, was just one more thing to go wrong. The car was just too fragile. It was a glass hammer. It could hit incredibly hard, but it would shatter on impact. Every race followed the same heartbreaking script, blinding speed followed by mechanical failure. In the end, the Ford F3L never won a single race, not one. After a disastrous 1968 season, the project was quietly shelved. A later open-top version called the P69 tried to solve the aero problems, but it was no more reliable. The car that was supposed to continue Ford's reign of dominance became little more than a footnote in the history books. It was a spectacular failure, a machine that promised the world but delivered only disappointment. Judged by the cold, hard metric of wins and losses, the F3L was a complete and utter dud, a waste of time, money, and effort. But history isn't always written by the winners. Sometimes the most beautiful losers are the ones we remember the most fondly. The F3L was one of those. It failed as a racing car, yes. But as a piece of design, as an object of desire, it was a roaring success. It captured a moment in time when car designers were dreaming big, pushing boundaries and weren't afraid to fail spectacularly. It was a car born from pure ambition, a machine that dared to be perfect, even if it meant being impossibly fragile. It was too beautiful and too fast for its own good. The legacy of the F3L, then, is not one of trophies or championships. Its legacy is in the photographs that show its perfect original form. It's in the memory of that shrieking Cosworth engine echoing through the trees at Brands Hatch. It serves as a brilliant lesson. Sometimes the most memorable cars aren't the ones that win everything, but the ones that break our hearts. We love them for their flaws, for their unfulfilled potential. They are the tragic heroes of motorsport. The rock stars who live fast, die young, and leave a beautiful corpse. And that is why the Ford F3L is a legend. It wasn't a great racing car. It was something more. It was a dream of what a racing car could be. A stunningly beautiful, impossibly fast, and utterly heartbreaking machine that was simply too delicate for the brutal world of endurance racing. It reminds us that in the pursuit of greatness, sometimes the most glorious failures are more compelling than 100 boring victories. It was a magnificent, beautiful loser, and I, for one, absolutely love it for that.